The clock on the wall ticked slowly, echoing through the quiet living room. Drake sat in his worn-out armchair, staring at the television without really watching it. The colours moved, the voices came and went, but none of it reached him. He had worked for nearly 40 years in the same factory. Steel, machines, and the constant hum of welding sparks had been his world. But now, at 60, the sounds were gone, and the silence felt heavier than the metal he used to lift. Retirement was supposed to be peace. People said, "You deserve to rest now, Drake. Enjoy the quiet life." But no one ever mentioned how painful quiet could be. He woke up early every morning, out of habit, only to realize there was nowhere to go. The factory whistle that had once dictated his days no longer blew for him. His body still moved out of routine, but his soul had nowhere to be. His children visited when they could, bringing stories of their busy lives. They told him to relax, to enjoy his pension, to watch TV, to take walks. But deep inside, Drake felt hollow. He wasn't tired from work, he was tired from doing nothing. Each day felt like a slow fade, as if life were gently erasing him from existence. One chilly morning, Drake went to his favourite coffee shop, a small noisy place on the corner, filled with the smell of roasted beans and fresh bread. He always sat by the window, where the sunlight hit the table just right. That morning, 2 young men sat behind him, talking excitedly about drop shipping, marketing funnels, and online business. The words meant nothing to him, but their energy did. They spoke about freedom, about building something of their own, about earning money even while sleeping. Drake sipped his bitter coffee and listened quietly. Their enthusiasm stirred something deep inside him, a memory of the young man he had once been. Once, he too had dreamed big. Before the bills, before the routine, before life became an endless loop of work and exhaustion, Drake had wanted to create something of his own. But dreams, like tools left unused, rust over time. As the young men left, laughing and full of plans, Drake looked out the window at the people rushing by. Maybe they're right, he thought. Maybe there's more to life than waiting for the end. That evening, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had heard. He went home, turned on his old desktop computer and typed into the search bar, "How to start a business online." The results flooded his screen, a sea of unfamiliar terms and strange faces promising wealth. It was overwhelming. After a few minutes, he shut the computer off. "This isn't for me," he muttered. "I'm too old for this." But that night, lying awake in the dark, the thought wouldn't leave him. Too old for what? Too old to learn? Too old to dream? Too old to matter? The questions burned in his chest like fire. He remembered the words his late wife had once said to him when they were young and broke. "Drake, you're not defined by your age or your mistakes. You're defined by what you do next." He closed his eyes and saw her smile again, gentle, strong, encouraging. For the first time in years, he felt that same spark he used to feel when fixing something broken. Maybe his life was just another machine in need of repair. The next morning, he walked to the nearby market, bought a notebook, and wrote on the first page, "Day 1. I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'm starting." It was a small sentence, shaky and uncertain, but it marked the beginning of something entirely new. From that day on, Drake decided he would stop letting the world tell him he was finished. Maybe he didn't have the strength of a young man, but he had experience, patience, and time, things money couldn't buy. He didn't know how or where this road would lead, but for the first time in years he had something to wake up for. That evening, as he cleaned the dust off his old tools, the smell of iron and oil filled the air once again. He smiled faintly. His hands, though wrinkled and rough, still remembered the rhythm of creation. Maybe, just maybe, the end wasn't the end after all. Maybe it was the start of something greater. The first days of Drake's new beginning were not heroic. They were awkward, confusing, and often humbling. He sat at his small kitchen table with his brand new smartphone. His son had bought it for him after hearing about his plan. The phone felt alien in his calloused hands, its smooth glass surface so unlike the heavy steel and rough bolts he had handled all his life. When he touched the screen, icons moved, music played, and somehow, once, he accidentally called the pizza shop 3 times in a row. His son laughed, but stayed patient. "Dad, it's okay. Everyone learns like this. You just have to keep trying." Drake smiled weakly. Keep trying. He had said those same words to dozens of apprentices in the factory over the years. Now he was the student. Each morning he practiced simple things: typing, sending a message, searching on Google. YouTube became his unexpected teacher. He watched tutorials on everything: how to use social media, how to film videos, how people made and sold things online. Sometimes he didn't understand the slang or the technology, but he watched again and again until it made sense. The learning curve was steep, and frustration often followed. There were moments when Drake almost threw the phone across the room, but each time he wanted to give up, he reminded himself why he had started. He wasn't chasing fame or fortune, he just didn't want to fade away. One afternoon, while cleaning his old garage, he stumbled upon something that would change everything. Stacks of metal scraps lay piled in a corner: bent pipes, gears, broken bicycle frames, forgotten tools. To anyone else, it was junk, but to Drake, it was potential. The smell of rust and oil filled the air, familiar and oddly comforting. He picked up a piece of steel and ran his thumb across its rough edge. For the first time in years, his hands itched to create again. He spent the next few days tinkering, cutting, welding, polishing. He turned discarded metal into something new. A lamp, rough and imperfect, but full of character. When he finished, he placed it on his table and turned it on. The soft yellow light filled the room, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Drake smiled, his eyes reflecting that same warm glow. It wasn't just light. It was proof. Proof that he could still build, still create, still matter. Encouraged, he made another piece, a bookstand this time, crafted from old bike chains. Then another, a candle holder welded from engine parts. His small garage began to look like a gallery of forgotten things reborn. Friends who visited were amazed. "Drake, these are beautiful. You should sell them," one of them said. "Sell?" Drake laughed. "I don't even know how to use Facebook properly." But the idea stuck. That night, he asked his son for help. Together, they created a small social media page called Drake's Ironworks, Art from Scrap. His son took photos of the lamps and decorations while Drake wrote short captions beneath them, describing how each piece was made. He told the story of the materials: the pipe that once belonged to an old bicycle, the gear salvaged from a tractor, the bolt from his factory days. At first, no one noticed. Days went by with only a few likes from friends and family, but Drake didn't mind. He enjoyed the process. Every morning he would make a new piece, photograph it, and upload it. The act of sharing made him feel connected again, to people, to purpose, to life. Then one evening, everything changed. A small design blogger discovered his page and shared it with the caption, "Meet Drake, a 60-year-old craftsman who turns scrap metal into art and hope." The post went viral. Thousands of people liked, shared, and commented. Messages poured in from all over the world. People inspired by his creativity, his resilience, his courage to start over. Orders began to arrive, and his small garage turned into a busy workshop overnight. Drake could hardly believe it. He worked long hours, but the exhaustion felt different. It was joyful, meaningful. For the first time in decades, he woke up excited for the day ahead. But beyond the growing orders, what touched him most were the messages. One woman wrote, "My father is 63 and feels like his life is over. I showed him your page and he cried. You gave him hope." Drake read that message 3 times, tears forming in his own eyes. He realized then that what he was building was more than lamps or metal sculptures. He was rebuilding something inside people, the belief that it's never too late. His son, watching him one evening as he welded under the dim workshop light, said softly, "Dad, you look happier now than I've ever seen you." Drake chuckled. "That's because I'm not working anymore." His son frowned. "What do you mean? You're working all day." Drake looked up, sparks glowing around him. "No," he said with a smile, "I'm creating." And in that simple sentence lay the truth. Drake had found not just a new skill, but a new life. He had learned to begin again. The first rush of excitement carried Drake for months. Orders came in from people who admired his story. Some bought his lamps out of support, others out of genuine appreciation for his craft. The small workshop buzzed with energy again. Sparks flew from his welding machine late into the night, and for the first time in years, the hum of work filled his heart with life. But success, he soon learned, was a fickle guest. By the following season, the novelty began to fade. Online trends shifted quickly, and the internet, so generous in attention, also moved on just as fast. Orders slowed, messages dwindled, and the followers who had once cheered him on now scrolled past silently. The warehouse of scrap metal felt heavier, emptier. Drake sat at his workbench one evening, staring at an unfinished lamp. The flame of excitement that had once burned so brightly now flickered. Maybe it was just luck, he whispered. Maybe that was all. He didn't tell his son. He didn't want to worry him. But inside, doubt crept in like rust, quiet, steady, eating away at his confidence. Still, he refused to quit. He began studying again, watching online business lessons, learning about product photography, marketing, branding. Many nights he fell asleep in front of his computer, glasses slipping down his nose, the glow of the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. His son noticed. "Dad, you don't have to push yourself so hard. You've already achieved so much." Drake shook his head. "No, son. Starting is easy. Surviving is the real test." But survival came with costs. His back began to ache more often. His hands trembled from hours of welding. There were days when exhaustion won, days when he looked at the piles of metal and felt only frustration. Sometimes he wondered if the world even needed another lamp, another decoration. He thought about closing the shop, selling the tools, going back to the quiet life he'd once dreaded. One night, he sat in darkness, the workshop cold and still. The walls echoed with silence. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his age pressing down on him. "Maybe I was foolish," he murmured. "A 60-year-old chasing dreams meant for the young." He almost believed it. Then, as if fate refused to let him give up, a message arrived in his inbox. It was from a customer, a young man from another city who had bought one of Drake's lamps months earlier. The message read, "Mr. Drake, I just wanted to thank you. Your lamp sits on my desk and reminds me to keep going. I lost my job recently, and every time I feel hopeless, I look at it and remember your story. If you could start again at 60, I can start again at 30. Drake stared at the words for a long time. His chest tightened, not from pain, but from a deep sense of realization. The world didn't need his lamps. It needed his story. The next morning, he turned the lights back on in his workshop. He wiped the dust from his table and whispered, "Let's get back to work." He began creating again, but with a new focus, not on profit, but on purpose. He started making pieces that told stories, lamps shaped like hearts to symbolize endurance, clocks forged from broken gears to represent second chances. He began sharing these pieces online with honest captions about his struggles, the slow months, the fatigue, the loneliness, and people listened. The post didn't go viral this time, but something better happened. They built a community. Older people who had once given up wrote to him for advice. Younger people asked how to start over after failure. Drake replied to each message personally, typing slowly but sincerely. He told them that success was not about speed or luck, it was about persistence and the courage to continue. Gradually, orders began to return, not from sympathy but from genuine connection. Customers bought his work not because it was trendy, but because it meant something. Each piece carried a message, a reminder that life could begin again, no matter how late. Still, Drake's journey wasn't smooth. Financial pressure lingered. There were times he didn't know if he could keep the lights on. Yet, he refused to borrow money or give up. Instead, he learned to manage costs better, to use materials more efficiently, to focus on quality over quantity. Through those tough months, he realized that passion alone wasn't enough. Discipline mattered more. The same patience that had once helped him fix broken machines now guided him through the unpredictable rhythm of business. At the end of that year, Drake looked around his workshop. It was smaller than most factories, but it was alive again. He had survived his first real test. One evening, his son came by with a small cake to celebrate his 61st birthday. As they sat together, his son said, "Dad, most people slow down at your age, but you've been through more this year than most young people in a lifetime." Drake chuckled, eyes soft with wisdom. "Maybe that's the secret. When you've seen as much as I have, failure stops being scary. The only real failure is giving up." His son smiled. "So what's next?" Drake looked at the lamp glowing on his desk, the same one he'd made from scrap in the very beginning. The light was steady, warm, and unwavering. "What's next?" he repeated. "Now I build something that lasts." The year after Drake's first major struggle became the year of his quiet rise. He didn't chase virality anymore. He didn't care about views or likes. He simply worked, patiently, consistently, intentionally. Every morning he walked into his small workshop, turned on the lights and said to himself, "Let's build something better today." His products evolved. The rough, uneven edges of his early pieces gave way to smoother designs, stronger welds, and more elegant shapes. Each creation carried a soul, forged from metal but born from resilience. Customers began to notice. Some even drove long distances to meet him in person. They didn't just come to buy a lamp, they came to meet the man behind it. One afternoon, a customer who owned a small furniture store approached Drake with a proposal. "Your pieces have character," he said. "I'd like to display them in my showroom." Drake hesitated. He had never thought of himself as a businessman. "I don't know much about contracts and such," he admitted. The man smiled. "You just make the art. I'll handle the rest." That partnership changed everything. Within months, Drake's lamps and sculptures were being sold across several shops in the city. His name, Drake's Ironworks, became recognized for something deeper than aesthetics. It represented perseverance, authenticity, and heart. With growing orders came new challenges. Drake's small garage could no longer handle the workload. He hired 2 young men, both in their 20s, who had been struggling to find steady work. They called him Mr. D, and from the first day, Drake insisted on teaching them everything, not just about welding and crafting, but about life. "Don't work just for money," he told them as sparks lit the air. "Work for meaning. If your hands move with purpose, success will follow naturally." Under his guidance, the workshop began to hum again like the factory of his youth. But this time, Drake was not just another worker. He was the heartbeat of it all. The young men looked up to him, not as a boss, but as a mentor and friend. As his small team grew, Drake began thinking about branding. He and his son designed a simple logo, a hammer crossed with a light bulb, symbolizing strength and creativity. They printed it on each product tag with the words, "Made from metal, forged with purpose." Soon, local media rediscovered him. A newspaper ran a feature titled "The Man Who Turned Rust into Gold." TV crews visited his workshop, capturing the image of the silver-haired craftsman working beside his young team, sparks flying like tiny fireworks. When asked during an interview what motivated him to keep going at his age, Drake smiled and said, "I just wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't too late. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was helping others rebuild theirs too." That interview touched thousands. Orders surged again, but this time the growth was sustainable. Drake wasn't overwhelmed. He had systems, a team, and a clear mission. He began receiving invitations to speak at community events and vocational schools. At first he declined, shy about public speaking, but his son insisted, "Dad, people need to hear your story. You're living proof that it's never too late to start over." Reluctantly, Drake agreed. The first time he stood on stage, his hands trembled. Looking out at the audience, a mix of young entrepreneurs and older workers, he felt out of place. But when he began to speak, his voice steadied. He told them about the fear, the doubt, the failures, and the nights he almost quit. He spoke about rust, how metal corrodes when ignored, but can shine again if cleaned and cared for. "We are like that metal," he said. "We might feel forgotten, but with effort, we can shine again." When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then applause erupted, not polite clapping, but heartfelt, thunderous applause. Afterward, people lined up to shake his hand, some with tears in their eyes. One young man said, "Sir, I was ready to give up on my dream, but your story changed that." Drake went home that night with his heart full. He realized he had become more than an entrepreneur. He had become a symbol, not of wealth, but of possibility. In the months that followed, Drake's Ironworks expanded. He rented a larger workshop, hired more workers, and began exporting small orders overseas. His son handled the digital side of the business, learning marketing and online sales, while Drake focused on design and mentorship. He never chased luxury. His home remained modest, his habits simple. Every morning, he brewed his coffee, opened the workshop doors, and greeted his team with the same warmth. "Good morning, everyone. Let's make something we're proud of today." One day, a journalist asked him, "Drake, when did you realize you had become successful?" He smiled, eyes crinkling with wisdom. "The day I stopped asking if I was too old." Growth had changed his business, But transformation had changed his soul. The man who once felt forgotten had become an artist, a leader, and a teacher. His workshop was no longer just a place where metal was shaped. It was where lives were reshaped. And as he stood one evening watching his apprentices work, laughter and music filling the air, Drake felt a quiet peace settle over him. The sound of welding, once the noise of labour, now felt like a song about second chances, about creation, about life itself. He smiled, whispering to himself, "This is what rebirth sounds like." By the time Drake turned 65, his name had quietly become known across the city, not as a businessman, but as the man who never gave up. His story was shared in classrooms, online videos, and articles about perseverance. But what made his success truly remarkable wasn't the money he earned. It was what he decided to do with it. Drake's Ironworks was no longer just a workshop. It had become a community. Inside the spacious warehouse he had rented, the sounds of grinding, welding, and laughter echoed in harmony. His team had grown from 2 young men to a dozen skilled workers, each of them someone who once struggled to find a chance in life. Some were unemployed factory workers, some were single fathers, and a few were retirees who, like Drake, had thought their productive days were over. Drake often said, "I don't hire hands, I hire hearts." He believed skill could be taught, but integrity and passion had to come from within. To make the business more stable, Drake and his son decided to build proper systems, something he had never done before. Together they organized production schedules, inventory tracking, and customer management. His son handled the digital side, setting up online orders, automating shipping, creating an official website, while Drake focused on ensuring quality and creativity never faded. It was strange, even amusing, to see him sitting with his son at the computer, reviewing spreadsheets and marketing campaigns. The man who once didn't know how to send an email was now analyzing data and approving designs. He often joked, "I still prefer hammers to keyboards, but I'm learning to use both." With structure came growth. Orders became more consistent and profits more predictable. But Drake wasn't interested in hoarding wealth. He saw business as a tool, not just to create products, but to create opportunity. One day, as he watched his team at work, he noticed an older man standing at the door, hesitant. The man introduced himself as George, 62 years old, recently laid off after 30 years at a factory that had shut down. "I'm not looking for charity," he said. "I just want to be useful again." Drake smiled warmly. "You've come to the right place." He gave George a trial week, teaching him the basics of welding and design. By the end of that week, George's hands had found their rhythm again. The spark that had been missing from his eyes returned. Seeing that transformation, Drake felt something deep, a sense of purpose far greater than profit. That same month, he launched a new initiative called Second Spark, a training program inside his workshop to teach trade skills to adults over 50 who had lost their jobs. It was free, funded entirely by Drake's business. His simple goal, to help others start again, just as he had. The first class had 5 students. Within a year, there were 30. Some joined Drake's Ironworks, others started their own small workshops. Local news picked up the story again. The man who builds more than metal, he builds hope. Drake was invited to speak at conferences, community centres, and even universities. At first, he resisted, claiming he wasn't a speaker. But when he stood before audiences, whether of young students or retired workers, his authenticity silenced rooms. He didn't use fancy words. He spoke from his heart. We're not too old to learn. We're too old to waste time doubting ourselves. Those words became his motto. As the business grew, Drake's son took over more management duties, allowing his father to focus on mentoring. Drake's daily routine changed. He still arrived early each morning, coffee in hand, greeting everyone by name. But now, he spent more time teaching than building. He would walk between workstations, checking on progress, offering advice, sharing stories. His laughter filled the workshop, mixing with the buzz of machines. He insisted on simple values: respect, honesty, patience, and pride in one's craft. When asked how he managed to create such loyalty among his workers, he said, "People don't follow money, they follow meaning." Outside the workshop, Drake's influence continued to grow. His online community expanded to tens of thousands of followers, not because of aggressive marketing, but because of authenticity. He shared lessons about life, mistakes, and small victories. His posts weren't about selling products, they were about selling belief. One day a journalist visited him and asked, "Drake, what drives you to keep doing all this? You could retire now and live comfortably." He chuckled. "I did retire once. Worst mistake of my life. Retirement is for the body, not the mind. As long as I can think, as long as I can create, I'm alive." That quote spread across social media, inspiring millions. People began calling him the Iron Mentor. Even with fame, Drake remained humble. He still wore simple clothes, still repaired broken tools himself, still stopped to chat with customers. He refused luxury cars and fancy offices. His success, he believed, wasn't in the things he owned, but in the people he helped. By his late 60s, Drake's ironworks had expanded to 3 locations across the country. His products were featured in design magazines. His training program had graduated over 100 adults, and his talks had inspired countless others to start over. One evening, as the sun set behind the workshop windows, casting long golden rays across the metal tables, Drake paused to take it all in. The hum of machines had slowed. His workers were laughing, cleaning up, preparing to go home. His son came to stand beside him. "Dad, look at this," he said softly. "You built all of this from nothing." Drake shook his head gently, a warm smile forming. "Not from nothing," he said. "From rust and faith." They both laughed. He looked around one last time, then whispered to himself, "I used to think I built lamps to bring light into rooms. Turns out I was building light for people's lives." The morning sun poured gently into Drake's workshop, painting streaks of gold across the metal tools. At 70, he still arrived early, coffee cup in one hand, notebook in the other. His body was slower now, his hair completely silver, but his eyes still held that quiet fire that had carried him for a decade. The world around him had changed. His business, his team, even the streets outside. But one thing had remained constant: Drake's purpose. He no longer worked to build wealth. He worked to build people. Every morning he began the day by walking through the workshop, greeting each person by name. Some were new apprentices, others had been with him for years. Many of them had stories that mirrored his own, people who had once lost everything but found new life through his mentorship. Seeing them laugh, create, and take pride in their craft was the greatest reward he could ever ask for. His company, Drake's Ironworks, had become more than a brand. It was a symbol, a living proof that second chances were real. His Second Spark program had expanded to multiple cities, offering free training and guidance to older adults and unemployed workers. Local governments even partnered with him, naming him an honorary community mentor. He didn't see himself as a hero. When journalists asked him how it felt to have changed so many lives, he would simply smile and say, "I didn't change their lives. I just reminded them they could." In those years, Drake spent more time teaching than creating. But once in a while, when the world grew quiet and the workshop lights dimmed, he would sit alone at his old workbench, the same wooden table he had used from the beginning, and craft something with his own hands. His touch was slower now, his movements careful, but every weld, every spark, every brush of metal against metal carried decades of stories within it. One evening, he finished a new piece, a lamp unlike any other he had made before. Its base was made of rusted gears, its stem forged from twisted steel, and its shade shaped like a rising sun. He called it Rebirth. When he turned it on, warm light filled the room, reflecting off the walls lined with old photos of his early workshop, of his first viral post, of his son, of his team. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. The light wasn't just bright, it was alive. His son, now in his 40s and managing most of the business, walked in quietly. "Still working, Dad," Drake chuckled softly. "Always, though now it's more like remembering." They sat together in the soft glow of the lamp. The younger man looked at his father with admiration. "You know, people say you built a company, but you didn't just build that, Dad. You built hope." Drake smiled, eyes glistening. Hope's the only thing worth building. In the following years, Drake began writing, small journals, filled with lessons, reflections, and advice. He didn't plan to publish them. He wrote them for his apprentices, for his son, and for anyone who might one day need a spark. His handwriting was shaky, but his words were steady. One passage read, "Don't wait for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. Start where you are with what you have. even if all you have is faith. Another said, age doesn't kill dreams, fear does. And his final entry, written on the last page of his journal, simply said, if my hands could build one last thing, it would be courage. So no one ever feels too old to begin again. When Drake finally stepped back from the business at 72, he handed it fully to his son and team. The company continued to grow, guided by his principles: quality, honesty, and heart. But Drake's legacy went far beyond iron and profit. It lived in every person he had taught, every worker he had believed in, and every light that had been reignited because of his story. On his 70th birthday, his team threw him a surprise celebration. They presented him with a large metal sculpture, a phoenix made entirely from the scraps of his earliest projects. Beneath it was a small plaque engraved with his favourite saying, "You are never too old to start again." As the crowd applauded, Drake stood there quietly, smiling through tears. For once, he didn't try to hide his emotions. He looked at his son, at his team, at the glowing lamp rebirth placed beside the sculpture, and said softly, "My hands built machines once. Then they built art. But what I'm proudest of is that they helped build people." That night, when everyone had gone home, Drake walked around his quiet workshop one last time. He touched the walls, the benches, the tools, each one carrying memories of sweat, struggle, and triumph. He turned off the lights, except for one, the lamp he had made from scraps on his very first day. It still worked perfectly. The light was small but steady, just like the man who had made it. He smiled and whispered to himself, "It was never too late. It never is." And in that moment, surrounded by the silent symphony of his life's work, Drake knew he hadn't just built a company. He had built a legacy of resilience, courage, and faith in second chances. Thank you for watching this story. No matter your age or where you are in life, remember this: it's never too late to start again. Every sunrise is a new chance to rewrite your story, one small step at a time. May you always have faith, courage, and the fire inside to turn challenges into strength and dreams into reality. And never forget, just like Drake, you too can start over whenever your heart says it's time.